I want to welcome everybody here tonight. I'm honored to have the opportunity to introduce to you the Seattle Metals Guild 2008 Lifetime Achievement Award recipient, Harold Balazs. I first met Harold in 1990 at the enameling conference at Highline Community College. Harold was introducing the enamel community to TIG welding. He created a copper rutabaga out of sheet metal and enameled it. As we all do, I fell in love with Harold that day and his view on making art. As he states, making stuff. His demonstration that day shaped my world of teaching. Harold was born in Westlake, Ohio, and received his BFA at Washington State University. Since graduation, Harold's managed to make a living with his art. Harold knows no boundaries, works large and small and in many mediums, and is best known for his large-scale public art. He was elected 3 times to the Washington State Arts Commission, received a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Enamelist Society, was honored by the American Institute of Architects, and chosen as a living treasure by the Northwest Designer Craftsman Guild. You will find his public art all across the country, bringing wonder to its viewers. In 2003, I asked Harold to come to North Seattle Community College and teach a workshop. His workshop was called Stencil to Image, and it opened the students' eyes to the endless possibilities of enameling. At that workshop, there was a student complaining that she didn't like what she was working on. Harold gently took the piece out of her hand, placed it on the floor, and proceeded to stomp on it until all the enamel was off of it, and handed it back to her and said, "Try again." That said, I introduce Harold Balazs. I'm sorry, I was so nervous. We have a pin to place on Harold, and we have a plaque to give him before he does his talk. So, may I?
Yeah. It's going to go right beside a pin. I have the International Metal Workers Union, IWW or something it's called. I thought of it, it's a wrench and a drift pin.
Now you have a gold one.
Gold? Oh. Wow. It's always nice to know that you touched a few people's lives, many people's lives. In my case, I've been very fortunate in that regard. So you better, when I talk, I don't always make sense. And so I'm going to run through a whole bunch of slides and stuff very quickly, so that'll help you make sense of what I talk about. And I have to say that my slides are of 3 sorts: awful, mediocre, and barely acceptable. And the good ones I have are all off of the publishers now. They're going to do a big hardbound 200-page book about me and have a and I'll have a retrospect at Spokane next year in 2/10 April, and the book's supposed to be coming out then. Okay. This was done by a friend of mine.
license. We went right out of college and started doing this. Pat and I, Flanny and I, sort of formed a loose-knit partnership making wrought iron field furniture and candlestick holders and that old Van Keppel green thing.
It's just an old sheet metal thing.
Oh, is that what this is called?
Box it.
Yeah, but you
Black and tack.
sheet metal is thin. You don't
Well,
tack sheet metal, do you? I mean, it's bent and crimped and,
oh, you have other ways of joining.
yeah.
But essentially, see, I used to do the layout when my father. He taught me how. Like you got a thing that comes, a square pipe that comes along and it's got to go like this. And you're dealing with plastics and that all has to be laid out.
I told you I thought it. I told you it was like the Bible. That's what like the Bible, actually.
How long it is?
Have you taught anybody the hollow metal sculpture technique?
Oh, yeah, I've shown it to a lot of people. It takes 2 years.
What are they?
Well, there's some other people doing it that,
I mean, what's the alternative?
well, bronze casting. Whack and tack.
Black and tan.
You tack it and then whack it, and sometimes you whack it and then tack it. If you tried to make every one of these pieces just exactly, yeah, you got a whole bunch of hours, especially in my copper stove. But if you get them within 1/8 of an inch, that's plenty. Because you just whack and tack.
How do you do that with one person?
What you're trying to do here, you see, is just a stuff corner to corner.
Right.
So you look at
You're gonna have a what? Overlap, you said?
Yeah. the piece on the ground right now life size? Why are you bending it? Oh, because it's not flat. Making design changes as we speak. But it's what water does, it makes sound. And what's going to happen is this pipe is going to have nozzles that make water do this. All collide and come crashing down. And into the center, into the center.
Now, this is some of my student work, and we didn't really have much to work with in our little thing, except a very primitive, small oxyacetylene. This is just iron wire, And I'm going to go through these real fast. You worked with what you had. I grew up in the Depression. I grew to value material more than human resources. I started working very early with architects, just black strap. Of course, that was very in the early 50s. This is these are all mixed up. There's no chronology. I just jumping all over the place because that's the way my life is. This is at Whitworth College. It's core 10. This is a very early piece, just scrap iron. That was when I was incredibly under the influence of David Smith. More core 10. These are quite large, about this high. This was when I didn't have any capacity to cast bronze. It's just all welded together with little short pieces of welding rod and then puddled, just with a brazing torch over the whole thing. Life size. And then I started doing repoussé. Don't ask me why, I don't know. And this is fair wear. I do a lot of little art shows, and I've never considered myself an artist. I hope a portion of the body of work I've done has qualified me to be an artist, but mostly I just make stuff, and I do these fair wear things, fair, W-A-R-E, so. And I try and have $5 things and $10 things and $100 things, so you can sell to just about any price range. And I've always been fascinated with my garden, and the only one of these I ever sold, I did about a dozen. There was one that was steel and it was chrome plated, and the marvelous potter, or jewelry maker in Seattle. Help me, Ron Ho's friend. Ramona bought it. And I think she gave it to the Tacoma Art Museum, but this isn't one of them. They never looked real. This is the one. They never looked real until I put the holes in them. It was quite interesting. This was a show I had at Gonzaga, all core 10 pieces. I was trying to make a statement from Star Wars and threatening demonic forms. More repoussé with the halo things are enameled, and that's copper. Copper and concrete, no, pardon me, core 10. And that was my 70th birthday show at Gonzaga. You all heard about Gonzaga, haven't you? Lead. I waited until I was quite old before I started doing this because we've all got to die of something, so might as well. But in my youth, I spent 3 years just soldering gutters, so if I was going to get lead poisoning, you should have had it by now. I've always been fascinated in antiquities, especially cartouches. There you go. You'll have to forgive me. I think I'm starting to get Alzheimer's. Aluminum. Aluminum isn't my favorite material to work with, but when I made that fountain you saw earlier, I got carpal tunnel on both hands and 3 hernias, and my wife and I decided we were never going to make anything that was any bigger than the two of us could carry. This is a very, very early piece. It's in upside down. It was sort of the history of flight and hangs in this Spokane Airport. This is in Renton on a bridge abutment. This was sort of a big theme of mine, of these river explorers, and I do a lot of whitewater canoeing, so this pile a bunch of junk in a craft and head down or upstream, mostly downstream, it's easier. And this is one that floats in Spokane. that was stainless. Genevieve Miller, the first girl I was in love with and wanted to kiss in the storeroom, I think we were in the 6th grade and we were studying Egypt, and we had to make a mummy. And we were studying Egypt, and I study Egypt in flax, if you remember. This was it's sort of a mummy for R2-D2. This is down at the Northwest Craft Center. It's just, we used to be able to get peeler logs at the plywood mill for $1, and that's where that started with, it was a peeler log. And this was a maquette for a very large piece that was about 15 feet, all wood. And this is another wood piece. This was all made out of the ends of glulam beams. It was about 24 feet high, I think. I must have made 100 of these. They're doors, mostly done with a bandsaw, and I think in this case it was all white pine. Then I got into building bolts, and I wasn't that good, so I made a lot of scrap. And I couldn't stand watching all that little pieces of wood go to waste, so I started making these things. They're not too big, maybe 2-3 feet high, some of them. And I made quite a lot. The nice thing about those, you could keep making them and then bring all the pieces in the house after supper and paint them, and then put them together. And then this was a piece I did for a project in Alaska, and then they turned it down. It was a maquette, and it was about 10 feet long, and to be 20 feet long. And I sold it to the guy who put it over his $1 million grand piano. And I put the thing together with hot glue, and I didn't know that hot glue, if it was in the sun, got soft again, and it all fell apart. And fell on his grand piano. But when I was in Spokane, there was this lumber yard that sold white pine, and this was a plank that was 3 feet high, 18 feet long, and 4 inches thick, and it was a quarter sawn plank. That was the days they made wood, and this is just one end of it. It's just all hand chiseled. And these are enamels. This was part of my 70th show. They're quite large. They're all about 3 feet tall. And years ago, we went down to Italy, and we went in the Uffizi and walked down this endless hallway of important personages. And they all had gold leaf backgrounds, and I was just fascinated with them. So I did a whole series of important people. And these, I'm a shameless image appropriator. In the old days, it was copying and it was frowned on, but image appropriation is very in now. And I go through history books and I find these startling little images that come from various cultures at various times, and I do my own versions of them. Those are 6 inches square. And it's just done on embossing copper, little kids do in the first grade at 32 ounce or 32 gauge. And with a stylus, and then very thin use of enamel. This was a swimming pool, well, it still is, down in Moscow, Idaho. And these are cast concrete, and then the recessed area, what you see is dark, is enamel. So it's like a concrete champlavé. And this is the other end of it. And they're all sort of contorted, playing in the water kind of thing, and it's called, "Hey Mom, look at me" kind of thing. I did a school in Anchorage, and there was no place for a big something. So we just scattered things all through the halls, and it was primer. And there's a ptarmigan and a paddle and a puffin, and we had sign language because they taught that there, and then like this is Morse code, and that up there is the signal flags that nautical people use. And that's a loon, of course, and a lemur, and it just Alaska particular flora and fauna. And then this was, I did got to go to Australia, and was just fascinated with the iconography those people left around, and got several books on it, so I did some more image appropriation. That was, and there's some more important people. That's just stuff. This was a little bit of scrap brass and scrap aluminum and some enamel work. And like I said, during the Depression, I just can't throw away copper or scrap metal, so I just keep making stuff out of the pieces. I'm down to making a whole stuff this thing. And this is another after Australia piece. It's all hammered copper and welded. In this case, I used the handheld, is it MIG? TIG is with a wire feed? MIG is wire feed. Okay, this is TIG, handheld, with just using copper rod as the fill. And the nice thing about using copper rod with TIG is if I want to enamel that, I can. Whereas if you silver solder, all of you who try to do enameling, silver soldering over enamel presents special problems. And then this is called, the bishop has looked at your project, affixed the seals, and found you wanting. These are small bronze castings, and then copper repoussé with enamel backgrounds. The few bronze castings I have done are all one-offs. I just make a wax and invest it in cast it. I don't go through the mold process, so they're all one-of-a-kind pieces. I love to pour bronze, but it's too tedious. This is a door on a house that some of you have ever heard of Tom Kundig, Seattle's most famous architect right now? Well, he's a dear friend of mine, and well, his parents were, and then he came along. And this is about 9 feet tall, and the door pivots rather than hinges. And then the inside is kind of just a very intricate pattern of copper shapes in a plastic background that I then sanded off, so it looks like a cloisonne. More enamel. This is 4 feet. For years, I was able to work in the Pioneer Enamel, which was down in Airport Way in the south end, and they since closed. And so, if I want to do things of that size, there's no place to do them anymore. I love found objects. I packed that stovetop 4 miles out of I was hunting in the canyon down on the Grand Ronde, and I couldn't resist it. That's probably one of the very first enamels I ever did. It was just right after I got out of college, and that's about the size it is. And I didn't have any kills, so I torch fired it. And I made it like a stained glass window, individual pieces that I just put down with glue. Now, this is kind of hard to see, but it's a snow shovel that I enameled with, and it has a great device on there for picking. It's called degraverscooping, and it was the symbol on the shovel is manure, And it's for, you know, shoveling up manure. You grubber scooping. And I spend a lot of time doing that. I worked for a mushroom grower. This is a processional cross, and I steam cast all the ends, and then the church gave me all of these jewels from people that had donated, and some SOB came in the church with a pair of dikes and stole all of the precious stones out of there. There was several $1,000s worth of them. Now this was a show I had in Tacoma a few years ago. And it was made especially for the History Museum there. And it was mostly collected and found objects, and they were shrines to various aspects of our culture. And it was a real fun project. And one of the things that happens as you grow older, your children start fretting over what you're going to do with all the junk. And so this way I at least get some of the junk consolidated in one element. This is out in Sound someplace. One of them places I forgot the name of. That was copper. More aluminum. The one thing I like about aluminum is that it is light and it's fairly easy to work. This is an S alloy. I can't remember just exactly what. And very easy to shape. But the man who sold me my wire feed assured me it'd push wire very well, but it didn't. And so I ended up mostly doing it with handheld MIG, TIG, whatever. There's too many acronyms in our life. This is in a school in Meade, where I live, and there's 5 of these things that sit, that one that you saw turning in the previous film. And this is a good example of hiring engineers and know-it-alls. They came up with these footings. Most of those things 3 people can lift up and carry, even though they're quite large. Well, now every one of those things, because of the footing they made for it was so big, it begun to sink. So they're all sitting in out there like this. And each one is a different material, copper, stainless, and then 2 aluminum ones, and Corten. This is one of my favorite pieces, and I have to admit, I made that right after I saw that marvelous piece that sits up by the Seattle Art Museum by Hariuchi, that's right there. I haven't done a lot of work in ceramic, but I have permission to work in a factory in Spokane, and these are 6-foot-high things I've done there in the brick factory. And I've carved, somebody told me I've carved over 80,000 bricks. And wood is another thing I like to play with. This is in Burien, in the library. I brought that to the site and laid it all out here, just as the way it's supposed to be, so the guy could just pick up the bricks and put them up here. They had numbers on the back, and it was a little Italian guy. Jesus Christ, who thought of a goddamn idea like this? He was just going nuts. You know, and I had a drawing, and before I sorted them and laid them all out just the way it's supposed to be, pick up and said, M1, where the hell is that supposed to be? But one of the interesting things that I've found out over the years as you do projects like this, you don't account for the time properly. I had no idea the amount of time that was required to number all of these bricks in inventorium. It was almost as long as it took me to carve them. It was, and to number that many bricks and not misnumber a few, And the thing that was always amazing, the bricklayers, the masons would take the brick, and the numbers were upside down. They'd put it in so the numbers are right side up, and they could see that it actually fit this way, but they wouldn't put it in that way. They put it in the way the numbers were. And so I think this one we had to chisel out 6 of them and put them in right. Wood again. But I have attention deficit disorder is the problem. This is in Bellevue Community College. It's the state archival building. The bottom one's white concrete, aluminum, gray concrete, and stainless. And there was a slide of this earlier. I've started doing this sort of thing, just making an extra piece and just laying it somewhere, like it's falling off. You know. And this is the fountain again. This is an active fountain, so it can be played in. I worked with the man who did that marvelous fountain down in Portland that everybody plays in. And at the time we were doing this, you know, they have these things called pop jets, and people run around in there. And this is a Scouts Honor story that my partner was being sued, as was the city of Portland, by a 38-year-old woman who claims to have lost her virginity by running over one of these pop jets. That's true. And this thing cycles. In other words, it comes down and it does all sorts of things. But that was the biggest nightmare of my life. The government people who are in charge of putting these things make it, I think in 10 more years, none of this will be being done unless there's a revolution. It was such an impossible mess. And then the sad thing about it was, this has to be as pure as water, as a swimming pool, which is understandable. But there's underneath this thing is an incredible complex system of introduction of chemicals to keep the water pure, and some clown from the city just went down there and started pushing buttons, pumped 50 gallons of hydrochloric acid through the system, and now it's all rusted. I mean, even the stainless won't take that. You know. Instead of letting it trickle out the way it was supposed to, it all came at one shot. But it is pretty spectacular in the morning and at night especially. But now it's sort of a golden color, which is not too bad, but when it was sparkly, it was better.
Where is that?
It's in Spokane, with a place called Riverfront Park. It's sort of where the Expo 74 was years ago. And then this is another one of the, what do you call it? I made shrines. And that little leaf down there exposes his genitalia. And then this is only a piece about 6 inches high, and it's all hammered copper and heliarched. I've tried to enamel a few of these, and I think because I'm impatient and careless, I haven't been successful. There are other people who have enamel-shaped copper things. There's an issue from the Enameling magazine a year or so ago where this man is making life-size copper nudes and covering them all with cloisonne. The most spectacular things you've ever seen. This is styrofoam. These are 4 feet square, and I start out with a 4-inch plank and cut it, and then I shove things this way, and I shove things this way, and then I put epoxy on it. It's a West system. It's a system used for boat building, and build it up to the point where it's about a 1/16 of an inch thick, And then I paint them, and any of you use black silk stove polish on your ironwork? It's almost, it looks almost like lead, but it's I think it's just nothing more than graphite in naphtha gas and maybe a little binder of some sort, but I use it a lot on wood, and wood that I have gessoed, and it gives this really rich metallic look. And the nice thing about those, that 4x4 thing weighs less than 20 pounds. Concrete. I've probably done more concrete work than anything, and it's mostly using styrofoam for molds. Seattle Pacific College. It was done, I made all the forms and molds and brought them over here in a cast concrete place. Did them. It's down in Eugene, Oregon, and it's, these are about 40 feet high, I think. And there's 6 of them, 6 on each side of the building. And it's onyx cast in a concrete grill work. And the light quality in there actually reduced me to tears. It was so good. And this is this piece in Ohio, my old hometown. This was a maquette when they first had a competition to do the waterfront in Seattle down there. Heiser got the piece, I think it was, the big slab. Well, that was my submittal. And this is what I'm sort of doing now. This is, I sit in there and it directs the telluric currents in the earth. Makes me very wise, but the retention valve is broken. I got to fix it. But Seattle, or Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, is an incredible little community that's raised a lot of money from their summer art festivals and things. And they started this park about 5 years ago. It's very small, about half a block. And it's next to Idaho Head Start place. And they needed playthings for the school children. And so this was a community volunteer project that we were just going to make all kinds of crazy stuff, a la Watts Towers and that kind of thing. And it was one of the most interesting projects I've ever been involved in. People all over town were bringing these things. And we would meet every weekend, and this one lady furnished all the food and brought it. And pretty soon, in 4 weeks, the bums in town had all found out if they show up and mix cement for 5 minutes, they get a hell of a good dinner. You know? But these things I did to practice to make sure I had a really good grasp of laying things up with mortar and so forth. And brick companies donated tons of brick, and we made this incredible gazebo, which they actually rent out for people to hold weddings in and so forth. And we even have a brick shithouse out there, and I don't know if you remember a long time ago, having a brick shithouse was just the penultimate of the human condition. You know? That's the end. Keep on giving awards to old people. The first one I got, an architect who was my same age said, he says, you got to keep in mind that the older you get, the more of these you're going to get. And he says, what it is that certain people who hold you in a certain amount of esteem recognize that you weren't really one of the top artists, but you sure as hell made a lot of it, you know. So you get this Lifetime Achievement Award, which means your life is over, you know. But on a serious note, which I seldom am, I've been reading E.O. Wilson. Anybody know about E.O. Wilson? Yeah, he's one of the greatest minds of our time. He's the Einstein of our time, and he's in biological sciences. But anyway, and then there was a book called Dawn to Decadence by Jacques Barzun, who is an essayist, been around for a century, I think. But discussing the idea of the changing art scene. And I didn't have any idea what I was going to talk about. And John said, well, they talk about your history. And I guess epiphany is the word. So I'll tell you about my epiphanies. The first epiphany, I think, was realizing during the Depression that material resources were more valuable than human resources. And I still cling to that. My children are going to have such a mess to deal with. But it gives you a respect for material that I don't think people growing up today have that respect for material. Simply, they are precious things that should not be wasted. And every time I go to the dump, I think that everybody in America should be forced to go there and spend some time to see what profligate jerks we are. If I had it to do all over again, I'd set up my shop next to a recycling plant, you know. And I can't stand to see all that stuff just disappearing. I want to go to one of those piles. And in fact, this one recycler in Spokane has agreed, and there used to be an art school, and I'd set up with an instructor, and we were just going to go there and take a piece and clamp and a bunch of welders and just start making something maybe as big as this room that would be a permanent feature in Spokane somewhere, but nobody will buy it. You notice most of my work is non-objective, and somehow when I was in art school, I was pretty damn good. I didn't show you any of my watercolors. I was damn good at that. But it didn't interest me. David Smith was the big thing, and Stuart Davis were my two, Paul Klee, Juan Moreau, people like that, and non-objective, whatever they called them, things that didn't represent. And I thought it was very foolish to sit there and try to replicate something in another material when there's just so many ideas out there that can be made. And, but you see, I was always Paganini, just always fascinated the hell out of me. And here was this virtuosity that is a part of what we're trying to do. So those cabbages were just show-off pieces to show you, Jesus, any clever, you can. And I think that all started years ago. I used to come over here, and just as you come in town, there was a Goodwill right. It was before they built I-90, and I used to spend a lot of time in there. And I went once, and there was a whole row of roses across the back of some part of the structure. And I went up and looked at them, and they were all made of everything from turtle shells to obsidian. Here were all these roses that from here to the wall looked like roses, but they weren't. They were made of other material, and that just fascinated the hell out of me. So I have that latent wanting to show off how clever I am. And, but mostly, now that I'm growing older, and you might listen to this carefully because some of you may have noticed I shake a little bit. Well, that's getting worse, and I'm not as strong, and when I start doing a lot of repartee, it hurts here. And when I did that show for the Tacoma Museum, the gal that ran the place gave me a book called Visionary, something was anyway about visionary art. And it's one of the biggest, most complete compendium of Watts Towers type of things. ever. And this is a phenomenon that's gone over the whole world for the last couple of decades, 3, 4 decades actually. And to me, it's the most serious art being produced today in the world. And the one thing that so fascinates me about these people, and keep in mind that I studied under all my instructors were Bauhaus people. And there was that thing that I bought into very early that, sure, this machinery can be used to replicate what we do, but I was always suspicious of it. You know, there was an element that equated craftsmanship to machine-like perfection. And I still want to see a dink or a gink. And I built a boat. And the first thing I did is just took my knife and put a great big scratch across the side of the hole so I wouldn't have to worry about that anymore, you know. And so the thing that fascinates me with people like the Watts Towers and geez, the other names of some of the more famous ones escape me, but they never let craftsmanship get in the way of their idea. And so now, because I simply can't see that well and I can't hold things, so I screw up now and then. Well, it's the difference between a, pardon me, a fuck up and a nuance. You know? And so, the quality control department is getting less rigorous as the older I get. And I'm sort of delighting in some of these. Maybe it's the lack of patience to hammer that bowl out just perfectly. I look at Mary Hu's work, and my God, how to maintain that level of, I mean, it's machine-like perfection, but it still embodies this everything that's perfect. Ron Ho was the same way. Is Ron still alive? I heard he was very sad. Yeah. And I think one of the things that I learned very early on, one of my teachers, he was a two-dimensional teacher, but he talked about the silhouette on the painting, that whatever you were dealing with. And then shortly thereafter, I was going through my history book, art history, and I ran across a Chinese a picture in a village. Some of you may have seen it, but it's two parallel rows of huge figures. I mean, you know, those big stone things those guys make. There's some in the Seattle Art Museum. And they just go back to infinity in the picture, and they start out as camels, and that's a kangaroo, and that's a whatever, and that's a whatever. But pretty soon, there's a point where you can't tell the species or what animal it is. But there's a strong silhouette there that is just, I am. And so that's everything I've gone at in my sculpture is this, I am. I have the right to exist, but you're not part of the world, but you have a right to exist. So I just don't care about representing things anymore. But there's a part of me, I did a lot of watercolors, and those were representative. And I've always wanted to do night paintings, and some years ago I got to see a Eustace Ziegler show in Alaska, and of course, what's his name, the big painter in Alaska? Ziegler. And they were all night paintings, and that's maybe what I'm going to have to do. After this winter in our place in 6 feet of snow, I've decided we're going to get to a quieter place, and I'll paint. But now, if you got any questions, I ramble on sort of endlessly. Oh, let me ask you, have any of you read 3 Cups of Tea? Okay. 3 Cups of Tea is about a man who was mountain climbing in K2, I guess it was, and was left for dead, and some villagers found him, and he was brought back to life, and after a year, he decided, he saw what was going on. This is in Pakistan. And he asked to see the school. And the boys had a building. The girls all had to sit out on the dirt and scratch with a stick. So he promised, in the manner of the first guy who climbed, Hillary, that he was going to come back and build these girls' schools. And he's done that. He lives over in Montana, and he wrote that book, co-authored it. And that was an epiphany. And I am trying, what I want to do is, okay, now we're building these schools for these girls, mostly. And the trouble he went through, the trouble that man went through to be able to build these buildings, it has convinced me that a fundamentalist religion is the scourge of the earth. But what I would like to do, I told you about this park I built in Coeur d'Alene, is now get the same energy, the same kind of operation going, and go there, and now they've got something to satisfy their intellectual needs, but let's just build these places of wonder in each of these villages. I think it would just be, out of available materials, such in the manner of Goldsworthy. You all know his work, who piles stuff around. And that experience in Coeur d'Alene is still going on. It's just a yearly thing, and things are added. And there's no aesthetic control. There's no panel of experts deciding what the design should be. And Coeur d'Alene is this magic little town where some years ago, you may have all read about the Nazis and so forth, and they've won several prizes for community involvement and so forth. And when they were... when the Nazis were getting ready for a parade, they decided to have a celebration of the human complexity. And at the time, there was a lama, a two-legged lama, visiting. He was Rinpoche, and he showed a sand painting. So we got together, and we came across a theme, which is based on some UN notice, to clasp the hands and know the thought of people in other lands. And so I did a Statue of Liberty in the middle, holding out her hands, and then down the beach, every 6 feet, I put a rock, and then in between that, we were just supposed to, all these people holding hands, of any ethnic, and it was 300 feet long, and these kids, and their parents. And the interesting thing was, when I first proposed it, the first people on the committee that were raising the money and so forth said, how are we going to judge and jury the designs? Why? Well, we want to make sure this is all aesthetically sound. I said, you don't understand, do you? I mean, this is a celebration of the human condition. Everybody gets to make whatever the hell they want. Well, what if somebody makes some genitalia? Yeah. Well, we all have them, you know. And finally I said, I won't do this unless you get off that high horse about aesthetic purity. And it made the national news, I remember. A helicopter flew over it and took a photograph. And of course, the beauty of the thing was that the next rainstorm, we used non-toxic powdered pigments and just mixed it with white sand. And one of the really beautiful things, there were some Nicaraguan children there who were in sanctuary at a Catholic church, and they brought all those kids down. And I couldn't, the only thing I could think of, they wanted to know what to make, and they're just little takes, and it's like, cucarachas. And so here's these kids made little cockroaches, you know, all through this design. It was just marvelous. And I don't know, there's something about experiences like that where you really, this park we did in Coeur d'Alene, I can't tell you how many people that have come up to my wife and I and said, thank you for being in our town, which is the humblest sort of kind of thing you can have experience. And you've given me the courage to try making myself a backyard barbecue. I went out and bought a cement mixer, and I'm going to try making one. You know, just little things like that. Fortunately, unfortunately, there have been some really stick-in-the-mud types that have opposed this from beginning to end. And across the street from this thing is one of the council members, and he isn't going to let that happen. They just get out of here. The lawyers for the school say, oh, sure, they may fall down. Somebody's going, that's how you learn not to climb up on dumb things, you know. And so this couldn't happen in the big city. There are several blocks downtown in Spokane where we wanted to introduce this kind of a thing. But again, there's just too many lawyers, too many jerks. But in a little town, you can have the troll, you know. And how did I heard that the troll wasn't pleasant over here. There was a lot of opposition to it. Is that the case? Does anybody know about the troll under? Yeah, we all know about the troll. And every city should have a place where there's just nothing but magical wonder, like the Watts Towers. The effort to tear down the Watts Towers, I don't know if you've ever read the articles about it. This is in Los Angeles, in Watts. And this man built this incredible structure to thank America. He was an Italian immigrant tile setter and built these things. And they're unbelievable. How many of you have ever been there and seen them? Yeah. It's just, and so I'm looking at what we're all doing, and my last show was a huge success. I sold everything practically, but it was just a bunch of baubles, you know. It was no different than what you see at J.J. Newberry's, but there isn't J.J. Newberry's anymore. That shows you how old I am. But, and I'm looking more at like this park. It's been transformative for me. And this man, the 3 cups of tea, building these schools in spite of the obstacles and the stuffed shirts and the lawyers and everybody who's opposed to free thought and creativeness. If you can come up with, I looked at, what was that, Hammering Man, when they put the ball on it? You know, God, what a beautiful thing, you know? It didn't hurt a thing, but it had to be taken off. Well, it was more of a work of art with the ball and chain on it than it was the way it is, you know? And here's these people who are supposed to be in charge of all that, and they really don't understand. How many of you have ever read The Velveteen Rabbit to your grandchildren? Well, you remember that line in there? You're all worn out, and your eyes have fallen out, and your fuzz is gone, and you can't be ugly when you can't be ugly. You know. Any questions? Or I'll babble forever. But this business of getting involved in your community, like she asked for, there are so many little things that can happen, and I think we have to start a real vandal art movement. Don't go for permission. It's easier to apologize than it is to ask for permission, you know. And it's just to suddenly stand up something out there and make it so nobody can push it over or tear it down. Nobody has a question? Yeah. My wife, I sort of dropped this, let's go to Pakistan and do this on her, and she'd read the book too. And she said, I'm not going there. And, you can't. You know, but I think Seattle has done really a pretty remarkable job. I see that over there by, we come in, my daughter, or sister-in-law lives on Lake Union, so we get off there on, is it Fremont? And they're starting a little outdoor bicycle park there or something with all kinds of neat little things, which looks to me like it had been a volunteer or something. But those little, one of the things is Jacques Barzoun, and Tom Waits is a big friend of mine. Well, not really, but I listen to all his music. And Jacques Barzoun talks about it as the role of art, any of the arts, all of the arts, to sound grace notes from the past. How many of you know Tom Waits' music? Yeah. Well, he just does that. There's a dee-dun-dun. There would be just a little 3-note bar or something. And that's why I feel perfectly easy appropriating images from the past, especially. And if and when I die, I suppose that's when I die, I'm not that egomaniac. I always wanted to be in that part of hereafter where they build boats. And somebody told me they'd all speak Chinese, so I've lowered my expectations a little bit. But I just would love to be involved, not so much as a creator, but as a conductor. And these roles I've had and these things, I'd make no judgments about this is right, wrong, or indifferent. But just everything has a right to exist. And this book by Jacques Barzun, he knows the fallacy of that thinking. But if we're a democracy and we really believe what we preach, and obviously we don't because we had a leader like we've just had, but I sure got hope for the new one. If we really believe that you're as good as him and and we're all equal and we're all out there making stuff, what is the point in having arguments that your piece meets the criteria for being put in the show and yours doesn't, and mine's better than all of you? You know, that's nowhere. That doesn't get us any place. And of course, somebody said the argument is, what happens to excellence? What happens to excellence? And I think excellence always survived simply because rich people survive. And they'll keep buying excellence. But I think somehow each of us has an expression and something in our life we would like to do. And if it's making a community park where there's great joy and wonder, I think that's valid. And it doesn't have to pass the committee that's set up to judge art. I'm very ambivalent on this. I'm very ambivalent. I don't like to jury shows. The few I have juried where they have monetary prizes don't get, I won't do them if they have graded prizes. In other words, I'll pick out 4 things and give them each an equal number of dollars or whatever. Don't start getting this good, better, and best thing going. It just tore me apart judging that show last spring. Every one of those pieces should have been shown. And maybe they were, I can't remember. Yeah. It just has to do with level.